Okay, I'm going to get started. On behalf of the State Department of Education and the IMEA, we are really happy that you're here with us today as we talk about cultural sensitive repertoire in our music classrooms. And today we are fortunate to have Robert Wicks, an elementary teacher from District 2, speaking with us today, and also Dr. Sarah Graham from Lewis and Clark State College. So welcome and thank you for reaching out and being willing to do this for us. This is being recorded and will be sent out Monday of next week along with the presentation. So those of you that cannot join us today, we will have this available for you on Monday. So without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen and mute myself, and I will turn the time over to Robert Wicks. Thank you so much.
All right, good morning. Thanks for coming this morning. I know this isn't always an easy topic to talk about in our classrooms, and everyone's situation is going to look differently when we go back this fall. Some will be face-to-face, some will be hybrid, and some might be totally online. But we still are teaching music, and we need to be sensitive to what we are teaching and the students that we're teaching. So like Rebecca said, my name is Robert Wicks and I teach elementary general music in Lewiston. And next year I'll be teaching K-5 as we're changing our school district makeup and middle school orchestra. So lots of different hats. When we teach, a lot of times we teach how we were taught. Is it our growing up, our experience, remembering our elementary experience or our public school experience? Then in college, we take methods courses and we learn repertoire for our students to teach certain musical concepts. We learn through workshops and conferences. Hey, that was great. I like that. You know, that could work for my students. And then songs using teaching resources, be it textbooks, be it online resources that we find, or songs that we gather from other teachers. Hey, what's working in your classroom? This didn't work in mine, you know, share something. So Rebecca, you can go ahead to the next one. So when we go into our classrooms this fall or whenever we're back in our classrooms, do we really know the makeup of our students, their cultural backgrounds? For like example, I'm in the Nez Perce County, Lewiston area, and you can see the highlighted there. And we are predominantly a European white society in Lewiston. However, that's not always the case in our classrooms. Just because a student looks white doesn't mean their cultural background is that. As our Indian Ed coordinator came in, she said, just because a child looks a certain way doesn't mean their racial background is what's on their face. So are we preparing our students for a global community when they leave our schools, or are we just preparing them for the community in which they live? 2/3 of Lewiston students do not stay in Lewiston. They go out in the country or around the world. So looking at cultures that we have in our state, and this is not an exhaustive list, this is just what I collaborated on and what we were able to think up in our own area and across the state. Do we know the makeup of our students, what cultures they're from? We know we have indigenous. In our area, we have Nimupu or Nez Perce. I know there's the Basque, white European, Asian, Korean, Japanese, and Latinos, Hispanics, Black African Americans. And within each one of those, there are subcategories, of course. Not all Asian societies or cultures have the same traditions. Not all white Europeans have the same traditions. So we need to find out those for our classrooms. So beneath the surface, what are we teaching in our classrooms that helps us be culturally sensitive? Do we know what song that we're teaching, where it comes from? Who was the intended audience? What is the meaning of the text and the lyrics, and what is the song portraying? With my older students, we do a lot of popular music and we talk about what is the meaning of the lyrics. With the primary students, K1, 2, 3, I don't really get into that. However, after reading a bunch of things, I need to do better with that and learning more of the backgrounds of certain songs. So looking at some of the song repertoire, and I'll be honest, I have used some of these in my classroom. That's what I learned. This is, you know, the songs that worked, taught different musical concepts. So looking at like Camptown Races, this was a Stephen Foster minstrel song. And the way the lyrics are written is to portray a Black character that is unsophisticated. So it's creating negative stereotypes. Same thing with O Susanna, the African-American slave portrayed as dumb, couldn't quite grasp temperature changes or geography. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, which I learned as a, like, even before school, was used in slave trade. That's how they would pick. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, I'm gonna pick that one by the toe. And then also they would hang people by their toes as punishment. Pick a bale of cotton, again, is part of this, the slave narrative. However, it's glamatizing that horrific time in American history. Dixie kind of speaks for itself. It's, you know, the anthem of the South, the Confederacy. I've been working on the railroad was a new one for me because I grew up with it. We have a large railroad here in Lewiston. So that one was new for me, which I'll be pulling out. It was a minstrel blackface song. Also, Run Child Run, I had learned at a workshop, and child was, the word child was placed over the N-word. So originally it was run and run, and it was about capturing those who were self-emancipators, who were escaping bondage. And then Johnny on the Woodpile, I use all the time. I used it in kindergarten to get kids in their head voices, to an easy echo song. But when I learned about it this summer, it's about human trafficking and standing on an auction block. And so, and same thing with chicken on a fence post. More with the slave trade. Dinah, the depiction of a mammy, which again is a negative stereotype for Black culture. And then Jump Jim Joe, my students love this. It has a great game. I've played it with my students. They love it. It's a partner, you know, they choose another partner and you jump Jim Joe. Well, that song is based on, they just substituted Joe for Crow, Jump Jim Crow. So again, it's instilling in those negative stereotypes to our students. Whether it's consciously when we're doing it, it's probably going right over their head, but it gets in their subconscious and it just perpetuates those negative stereotypes for people of color. Last night, as I was doing some research and some things, I watched a YouTube tutorial from a Northern Paiute person from the Decolonizing the Music Room website, and she was talking about the land of the silver birch and the canoe song, which is in a lot of our textbooks and resources. And she said those are outdated. They were European, written to sound like Native American songs. She said you got to be careful with Native American work. Sometimes it's written specifically, that person owns it, the song, and is not meant to be performed. Sometimes in American Native culture, it is a song that was just made up, or it was a song that they gathered from other tribes during inter-tribal communications and meetings. So we need to be careful with songs in our area. And she also explained that there are dances that go with these songs that are cultural, and instrument parts that go along with it specifically. So just because we might want to do it in our classrooms, we need to make sure that we're reaching out and asking, and we need to make sure that we don't change anything in it, like instrument parts or something like that, because they want it to be cultural sensitive to those culture bearers. So I know this speaks for me too. I have used some of this stuff and reluctant to change. I don't have time to look up the information. As elementary teachers, we are the assembly line. One class goes out, one class comes in. And so it is hard to find that time, but we need to find time. I've also heard this within my own family: we will change our history. No, we're not necessarily changing our history. We're just giving other perspectives to history. I cannot know everything. I don't have time to plan something new that I know that works for me. I know that's something that I have used too, but there's tons of music out there. There's tons of resources out there that we can look into and become more aware of what we're doing in our classrooms. I don't want to make a mistake with incorporating other cultures. That was me. I didn't want to do a lot of cultural music because I didn't want to offend, or I didn't want to say a word wrong or portray it in a negative way. But by not doing some of those cultural things, even in our own area, we just reinforce that white European music is the best music, when it's just part of our whole one section of the globe on what music is. And my hesitation to approach the conversation because I'm scared to look foolish, be offensive. And sometimes by not having those conversations, that speaks louder than words. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. We make our students feel uncomfortable every day in our classrooms by trying new things and saying, nope, Johnny, you can't do that. Well, that might be okay at his home, but in a different place it's not. So same thing in our classrooms. It's okay for us to feel uncomfortable, get out of our comfort zones. I mean, I got out of my comfort zone with technology this year. So it's okay to have those conversations. So the effects of, for lack of better words, kicking the can down the road. So our students in our classrooms who might belong to a different culture or different cultural background than what I might possess, or a large majority of my students, when they hear different songs or they see different children's literature that we use in our classrooms, those students of color or different backgrounds might feel othered. I don't see myself in this. And it's not reflecting their musical community. For example, I did a history of rock and roll unit where we were looking at different things on television where like the American Bandstand, and we looked at the music that was used and how people were dancing as partners to start with, and then it was individual more towards the later 60s. But then we also looked at the race makeup, and my Native students said, it's all white again. And so we had a conversation about segregation. We even had in Lewiston, which is primarily a white society, we had segregation in Lewiston with Asian Americans. You know, they were underground. The streets in Lewiston, how they were designed, so Asian Americans were working in the basements of buildings, and so they weren't allowed out on the streets. So it's okay to have those conversations. Of course, you have to make it developmentally appropriate for the age level in which you're teaching to. Whitewashing or erasing history, white Western European music is the most refined, it's the best. So monolithic treatment of cultures such as African, Native American, and lack of visibility of people from within those cultures that we are learning about. And the entitlement. So it's just breaking down some of those things. And it's okay to make mistakes. I mean, we all make mistakes in our classrooms every day. So go ahead. So when we go into our classrooms or online or our situation this fall, really look at, why am I teaching this particular song? Am I only teaching this song? Is this the only song to teach notation, music reading concepts? Is this the only song for transitions? Is this the only song to teach musicality? Is it the only song for fun that my students enjoy? Well, they might enjoy another song. What works? Yeah, it might work in our classrooms now, but there might be also other things that work in our classrooms. And then, is this the only song that you really remember from when you were in a school? No, I remember my elementary music teacher, she taught a lot of different songs. And it's nice I can still have that conversation with my elementary music teacher. So the next step. So identify the reasons for teaching a particular song. So for example, Johnny on the Woodpile. I learned it at a Fire Robin workshop. It was in his book. I'm not saying his stuff isn't good. He has a lot of amazing materials that I use, but finding a different song to supplant Johnny on the Woodpile. So I just looked up some echo songs. I found Boom Chicka Boom. You can look at the video when the resource comes out. I'm not 100% sold on it, but it's a song that engages students, and you can change into your head voice to get the students into your head voice. And the background of the song is someone made it up to engage students. It had nothing to do with racial backgrounds or stereotypings on that. My students love Chicken on a Fence Post. 2 concentric circles, they move, they have the chicken, the rubber chicken in the middle. My students even named it Herman. And so, but it's not the only song to teach 16th notes to students. Love Somebody, Passing Game, Tidy-O, another concentric circles, using some of those things. That's not gonna negative stereotype others. So looking at a song, KK Kool-Aid, which I use as an echo song for my older students, call and response, echoing, it's a movement activity as well, but showing students where the song comes from. And a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, it comes from Africa, and we need to be more specific. Africa is a country or a continent, not a country. So the more specific that we can show our students, the more that they can understand the world around them. So it comes from the resources that I gathered. It comes from Ghana, and there's a map of Ghana. What's their flag look like? Okay, there's 4 colors, there's a star in the middle. And then I always try to show people as they are today. You can see people are at the beach. Of course, this is before social distancing and COVID. So I tell them, and we look at the picture, oh, they're dressed in normal clothes like we wear, or they have houses, or oh, look, how they're driving and what the food that they eat. And it's sometimes when students talk about Africa, they think it's the Lion King. They open their back door and there's lions and elephants and giraffes. And then we talk about here in our town, do we open our back door and see moose and elk and mountain lions? And some kids will be like, well, I live way out. Well, yeah, but that's a, isolated thing. But typically we don't see that. So same thing with other cultures. So we need to show what it's looking like today. So in just 15 miles from the town in which I live is the Nimupu Nation, or the French word Nez Perce. And just as a disclaimer, the Nez Perce, it's supposed to be pierced noses. They never pierced their noses. The French people that came over the mountains, just kind of stereotyped that and gave them that name. But the majority of the time they go by Nimupu when you're out there. So showing some pictures of it. Where is the reservation? What is a reservation? How did that come about? Then showing some, in the one corner is a YouTube video of a Nez Perce drum circle. So showing it authentically being made, music authentically being made. In their school, they have football. Their students playing football. In their classroom, I actually taught with the teacher who was in the picture when I taught out in Lapway on the Nimupu Reservation. They go to school just like our students go to school. They're putting their heads down because they're bored in class, just like my students or students in their math. When they're doing math, they put their heads down and don't want to try as hard. So taking those stereotypes away, they do not wear their regalia to school, and calling it regalia, not a costume. Headdresses, nope, they don't wear those. Certain ceremonies, they'll wear things like that. Powwows, different things. So learning about that culture. And then if you want to do a particular song, making sure that It's not a song that is specifically owned by a person, or making sure that you sometimes have to ask permission. You can do listening. They do have some CDs and YouTube videos out where you can do listening examples. So what instruments do you hear? What was the music used for in the Nimupu culture? Did you portray the culture in a respectful manner? Or are we stereotyping through our speech, through images? And again, not all music is meant to be performed and sung, because they are, a lot of them, individually owned. So there is kind of a resource there that you can go click on it, and it'll tell and talk about Nezper's music. They're kind of protective, but it does talk about instruments used, the purpose of songs, and what they were used for in their culture. So that really helps students then in my classroom see themselves. We have more of a native population as our largest subsect of racial backgrounds of students. So this helps them feel that they're part of the classroom as well. Go away, B. So the next step in the elementary band and orchestra room, because I teach both elementary band and orchestra, and next year middle school orchestra, a lot of times as instrumentalists, we don't have to deal with words. And so sometimes doing songs, we think, oh, well, we're not teaching the words. Well, it still perpetuates negative stereotypes. So in our method books, I use accent on achievement for band and essential elements for orchestra. It's really looking at those songs. And I know being in 4 different schools next year, and I mean, time is tight. We just typically, okay, next song, next song, next song. But it's being cognitively aware of what is in our literature choices. So for example, to teach single eighth notes, eighth rest, in the method book, Camptown Races was used, and to get that separated sound. Well, take that back and use Old MacDonald instead, okay? Oops, sorry, I skipped, that was Polly Wolly Doodle. So making sure that, you know, we can use other songs that they've already learned, just change it a little bit, or go to the different one in the book and not even do that one. A lot of times those books do have different songs from other cultures. A lot of times it is white European, but we can change and adapt as we see fit. So those are just some things that I'm going to be trying this year in my classroom as well. So some things I watched a webinar on what values are we teaching our students. And the presenter talked about list all the composers that your students played this year. And is it all men? I know this year it was kind of weird, but at December, I had students perform a song by a female composer, and my female students were like, yay! They were celebrating. They were so excited to play a song written by a female composer. At the elementary band and orchestra level, it's very challenging sometimes to find these resources, but they are out there. You just gotta search. And then, was music written by all white people? All music comes from the United States. And then in the orchestra world, if you're doing fiddle songs, making sure that they're appropriate also. A lot of fiddle songs might not be the best choice. The background that comes with it, or the lyrics of the song. So just making sure that we, you know, preview ahead of time and make those choices. So what song choices might help students understand there's more to the world and then their region. So find composers, female composers, composers of color, and then songs that portray world cultures in a respectful manner. So as we go back into our classrooms, I know for me it's about a month away. So, you know, take baby steps. You know, pull out some of those songs interject some of those songs. Maybe pick a grade level. It can be overwhelming to do all K5 or all, like next year for me, K8. So focus on one grade level, and then next year 2 grade levels, and then go from there. Sometimes starting small, just like when we're cleaning out a closet. Take small steps, and then you'll get there. You don't run a marathon just in a day, you train up to it. So taking those steps. So I think this is my last slide. Is this my last one? Yep, so I'll hand it over to Dr. Sarah Graham.
Thank you. So I want to just start by saying that most of what Bob just said is applicable to, yeah, sorry, we have an echo. There should be a mute yourself on the screen.
I am, but I can still hear.
Oh.
How do I turn the volume
down? Oh, it's underneath on the side. There you go. There should be on the top there. There you go. Okay, so most of what he said is applicable, you know, at all levels, I think, and really kind of gives us a basic idea of how we might look at and approach things. I'm going to go through kind of talking about the way, go into a little deeper how we might talk about this. And so with cultural competency, I'm looking at it from 3 perspectives. This is awareness, knowledge, and skill. And this is taken from multicultural counseling framework and looking at cultural humility. And so really awareness is one part of this triangle, and it's just being self-reflective. It's looking at the music and our repertoire and our curriculum from the inside out. Knowledge we acquire by either study or experience, and we're taking something from the outside in. And those 2 things work together, obviously. And then we take those things and then we apply that as a skill. So that's the application or demonstration of these things. They're all equally important. We do all 3 of them, but it's important to approach them with the posture of cultural humility. And we can go on to the next slide there. Rebecca, thank you. At the bottom, you say approach with a posture of cultural humility, which really just is an attitude of not knowing everything and an openness to learning. It's okay to say, I don't really know this, or, you know, teach me how this is done, how your culture does this. And then when we do something wrong, to approach that with humility as well. That's how we learn those things. So ways that we develop our awareness are through professional development. Oh, I'm back on the other one still, sorry. Through professional development, personal experiences, our own self-reflection, knowledge the same way, professional development, education, whether that's formal or informal, all contribute to our knowledge. And then skill with interpersonal experiences, or programming, others programming, repertoire selection, which we're going to talk about in a minute, our pedagogy, and our rehearsal techniques. They all fit into skill that are fed by that awareness and knowledge. So as far as selecting repertoire, some of the considerations to be thinking about in terms of cultural competency are what's the cultural competency of the teacher? So what is your level of cultural competence with something? Do you know much about the culture that you're teaching? And not just the cultures that you're teaching, but the students that you're teaching, and how they see the world. What's their worldview like? Because that's important in the way we approach it. And looking at representation and historical accuracy. Who's represented and who is not? How is a piece marketed? Is it marketed accurately? Whose voice is represented and whose isn't? And then what was the intent of the piece? Why was it written? And Bob went through quite a few pieces, right, that originated with minstrel shows. You know, minstrelsy was the most popular form of American entertainment for nearly a century, which is a long time. And so there's a lot of music involved with that. Much of it we learned, as he said, you know, I learned it in elementary school. Much of it we learned under a euphemism as being a folk song. We learned them as American folk songs, but they're not really folk songs. They fall into a minstrel category. And then to ask, is the intent of that piece, was why it was written, more important than the potential impact that that can have? Impact is really more important than intent. You know, I can say, oh, well, I didn't mean to do this, but the impact of what you did is still there. I think it's Maya Angelou who said, people will forget what you say and what you do, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And that again is impact of what somebody's done. Okay, we'll come to that. So some of the specific issues that we run into, or that we've been taught in our college courses, in our methods courses, are traditional elements of programming. Really, really important. Programming is critical. So in choral music, and I would assume it's the same in instrumental music, you talk about the way you plan a program, whether that's, tempi, you want to vary the tempi, you don't want to have a whole bunch of slow songs together and then fast together, we kind of vary that. We talk about openers and closers. I have some colleagues in choral music who have always taught that you end a program with this upbeat spiritual, because that's entertaining and it sends the audience off, on an upbeat note. But if we look at what a lot of the spirituals really are about in that coded language, it's A, not accurate, and B, appropriating that music in a way that we don't want to do. So it's not that it's not okay to use a spiritual as a closer, but I think it's important to think about and very intentionally plan where we put this music in our programs and why we're programming it. There's some great spirituals and gospel music, and in the end, in the resources, there are links to a couple of resources that are also very good for looking at that. But what else can we use? There's a lot of upbeat music that's great as an opener or great as a closer. I conducted the Idaho All-State Choir a couple of years ago, and we did a spiritual. We did Moses Hogan's, which one was it? I can't remember, one of the upbeat musicals, but it was in the middle of the program because the program was designed to take us through storytelling, and we used something else at the end. So there are a lot of ways you can still use that music authentically. Programming on themes. I almost always program on themes. I always have. It gives me a way to structure what I'm doing and to make meaning for not only my students, but for audiences. And I'm guilty of this when I taught high school. We would do a multicultural concert every December. It was December around the world. So we took the focus off of it, of a holiday. We took the focus off of sacred music. But by simply just programming a concert of multicultural music and then not doing that the rest of the year, we're not really integrating that music as something that's important for what we do every day. And so it's important to think about how we represent themes in our programming as well. And then make sure we're representing things accurately when we do that. And then finally, narration or program notes. I'm a big believer in program notes. I think they're really important. And if for nothing else, the parents that are bored in the audience, they have something to read. That happens. But that they're accurate. I've sat through quite a few concerts where students will get up and talk about a song, and I don't know where the information came from, but it's not even close to the correct. So that's really important, just to make sure that it's accurate. It's better to not do it than to misrepresent something, I think. So, okay, moving right along. Let's see here. Hey, Rebecca, did I lose her? Is yours freezing? Oh my gosh. Okay.
Your video is frozen. Can you not see the next slide? I went to the next slide.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So this is an outstanding resource. It's fairly new. Kelsey Gamza has put this together, and currently, as of July 15th, she had over 400 works for band, marching band, choir, orchestra, and then some other ensembles. And I wanted to show you this resource because I think this is really important. So she created this spreadsheet. She just started doing this spring, and she has been listing works that we can find in various catalogs, and she's color coded them according to how they're listed. So these are editor's choice, basic library selections at J.W. Pepper. So if we go, you can see some of these pieces. A lot of them are minstrel songs. You know, Stephen Foster, medleys, Camptown Races. You see My Old Kentucky Home, these songs. And she shows you where you can find them. There's a website, if you want to, you can go through and click on these, but it shows you where you can find them, who they're for, and then where you can find information about them. Many of these works, I can't remember which color it is, but many of these works have been removed from these catalogs since this has been posted, which is really, really great. So there also is information, let's see, it's green, indicates it's been removed from the publisher's catalog. Yellow indicates that it's been removed, yellow from the publisher's catalog, green is from publisher's catalog and Pepper Music, so you've got that. But she also gives you all of the contact information for these publishers. So some of this music that probably isn't appropriate for us to be performing, you can write to or contact and advocate for those to be removed from the catalog. Now people think, oh, well, if we just remove this music, you know, this is a part of our history, and absolutely it is. And there's a way and a place to teach that. It doesn't necessarily mean that we need to perform it. We can study this music, you know, in other ways. So, and you'll see, if you go through, you can see there are just a lot of these. So this has been a really great advocacy project that she's put together, excuse me. But you can also go through, I know I have a lot of these titles in my core library. You might think about where you have them in your libraries, or if you have them in your libraries. If you're an elementary music person, even just some of the titles will indicate things you might look at that are in your curriculum that you're using. So, so that's a great resource. A couple of, if you want to go through to my sources, I think it's a couple slides next. I want to point out just a couple things. So these are some of the additional resources that I recommend to use. One is this, the Slave Songs of the United States, and it's a reprint of the 1867 anthology. It's the first edition of these songs published in the United States. Has a lot of the original text, original music that you can look at. It's a really good resource. American Experience on PBS has a Blackface minstrelsy section that you can view to get some information on that. A couple of other articles here. One I want to point out, if you look at the towards the bottom, that Neighbors Chorus is an article about a piece that many high school directors know. I sang it when I was in high school. I actually did it with my high school choir back in the 90s when I was teaching high school. But now we look at this and it's got some questionable lyrics. The translation is fairly violent. You know, it talks about, you know, beating and choking and knocking a woman around, and it's probably not appropriate now, even though, you know, maybe we didn't think about that so much before. So there's an article about that. Adam Cleveland actually, I think, is from the Twin Falls area, if I remember correctly, is Idaho. And then I recently wrote an article for the Northwest Notes for ACDA called Zippity Doo Don't. And it talks about some of the origins of where this music comes from. Zippity Doo Dah, we all know this famous Disney song, comes from Zip Coon, old Zip Coon, the tune of which is Turkey in the Straw. And it's a minstrel song. Zip Coon and Jim Crow were the two early primary minstrel characters. And so that's where this refrain comes from. And I talk about that in that article. So that's kind of an interesting thing that gives you some background you might want to look at as well. If we go to the next one, there we go. These top two, if you're looking for books, or your district is gonna buy you books, or you just want books, to put in your repertoire, these are two really important ones. Eileen Gunther's book, In Their Own Words, Slave Life and the Power of Spirituals, is outstanding. It's a pretty big book, but she talks about specific songs, and she goes through quite a few of them and their history and their meaning and why they were significant, and different ways you can use them. And then Andre Thomas's book, he talks a lot more about performance practice. And I think that that's also a really excellent resource. Those two together really, I think, equip us in a way that can make you feel like you know a little bit more. I mean, they're really outstanding. And there's more being published, but those are great resources to have. And then of course, there's a couple of others that you can look at. So that all being said, it's a lot to think about, and it's a lot to, you know, we kind of have to retrain our brain in the way that we look at what we choose for our singers, for our players, for our students in general. And I do that in my methods class as well. We look at all of these things in early childhood methods, and so my students can look at and analyze, well, where did this come from, and why am I teaching it? Can I use something else? You know, so I think that that's important. Now is a great time to do that, I should add, because many of us in our performance ensembles are finding alternatives, looking for alternatives to maybe performance and rehearsal all the time. And so this is a great opportunity to maybe tackle some of this history or cultural aspect of the music that we teach with our students. So you can take advantage of that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, for going through those.
Does anybody have questions? We have about 10 minutes of questions, and I know that some of you are putting them in the chat.
My chat disappeared.
So I had a question. I grew up in fiddle culture. I grew up as a fiddler, and I completely understand that there are many songs that we should not be using in our teaching experiences with our students. However, bluegrass is such a large genre. I don't think that we need to say cut out all fiddle songs. I think we just need to be more aware of the backgrounds of the fiddle songs that we're choosing. Like, for example, I grew up taking from Tony Luediker, who was an amazing fiddle player in Northern Idaho, Spokane area. And I'm still really decent friends with his daughter, Kimber Luediker, who is part of a band called Delamay. And so I'm planning on working with her to help teach my students about what bluegrass is today and separate that from maybe some of the ideas that we've gotten from bluegrass in the past. Do you think that would be something appropriate that we could do with our students?
Yeah, I think that's great. You know, we don't want to take out everything or a whole genre. It's just being culturally aware and knowing the background of some of those certain songs. Like some of the fiddle songs, the lyrics aren't necessarily appropriate for 5th and 6th grade. You know, just knowing some of those, but looking for another fiddle song, or like you said, with bluegrass, separating it from what it was to what it is now. That's going to really help our students to understand a larger global concept and how, and music does change. You know, if we look at popular music, how it changed more, it was all about love songs and stuff when it kind of started in dating, and now popular music, even though it has that, it's a little more graphic and what's going on today. So I think that you're on the right track. So that's great.
I'm going to just add to what Bob said there with Amy. There's so much great fiddling music. Sorry. And it's such an important genre. Really, I think it really is. And there's Celtic music, there's all of that. But because there's some of it that's not appropriate, it's a perfect opportunity to teach why, and then that can branch into why, this is why we don't do this, or, so I think using it that way is so great. So yeah, I love it. Yeah, I think that's great.
So Clara is asking how she can access the spreadsheet that Sarah shared, and I just wanted to let you know that the slideshow will be made available, and the Google link is embedded in the slideshow, so you will have access to all of Sarah's resources.
Yeah, thank you.
I also see that Julia shared a resource too, if anyone wants to check that out. She shared it in the chat.
I didn't mention, but I want to mention Rob Deemer, who's a colleague of mine at State University of New York, Fredonia. For the last several years has been doing a composer diversity project, and that's now based out of there, where he's been looking at symphony orchestras around the country and their programming and the kind of programming that they do. And so there's some really interesting stuff with that, the Composer Diversity Project, if you're interested in looking at some of the statistics and how that works. So check it out.
Okay, any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, I just want to really thank Sarah and Robert for taking time out of their busy schedule today and addressing these concerns, because I know this is a huge topic, especially this year. So we really appreciate your time and your effort. On behalf of IMEA and on behalf of the State Department of Education, we thank you again. And again, I'll tell everybody that this will be made available for distribution on Monday. So feel free to send to all your colleagues and tell them that and then also, if you have any suggestions on what you would like to see in upcoming months, and especially as we go back to school, I know the timing might be weird for people. We've been doing it Wednesdays at 10 a.m., but if that obviously doesn't work, then we can talk about like a Saturday workshop, or we can talk about like a 4 to 5, something like that. If I know a lot of people showed interest in the arts and social emotional learning, and also Flipgrid and some other tech things. So if you have anything that you are interested in about, or that you are an expert of, make sure that you reach out to me, and we will definitely get you on the schedule and make sure that your information gets out there. Especially in this day and age when we need a lot of support on how we're going to look like in the fall. So again, thank you everybody. And again, thank you to our presenters, and we will talk to everybody soon. It's okay. No, I need.